Hello everyone, it's Foo here, and the Indigo Disk DLC has just dropped, and with it we have lots of new toys to play around with. But we're going to be talking about buffs to old Pokemon in this video, so no spoilers about the new Pokemon or things like that here. You're in safe territory, we'll save that for another video. And I'm going to split this into two sections. The first half is very fun, it's all those overlooked and underrated Pokemon that are getting buffs to help them shine a little bit more. This is the thing that I live for, and I can't wait to tell you about all of those. And then in the second half of the video, we're going to be looking at the good Pokemon that just keep getting better. These are the ground-shaking tectonic buffs that are really going to change how things work. But let's give some more underrated Pokemon a bit of a look first. So I want to start with some starter Pokemon. We have Sceptile coming back, and with it, it's bringing a new egg move in Sceptile. Sceptile sacrifices some of your health to switch out and give the incoming Pokemon a substitute. We've seen it with Cyclozar and Orthworm, and it's really nice to set up that incoming Pokemon. Sceptile is very fast, so it should be able to do this quite easily. And it's a pretty cool buff for Sceptile. It's such a niche move with very limited distribution, so it will be interesting to see how Sceptile puts it to use. And then we also have Emboar as a starter Pokemon getting some significant buffs. Emboar now gets access to close combat. Last time we saw it, it was kind of relying on superpower as its fighting type move of choice, which sucks because it drops your attack stat, so you can't really spam it very well. Close combat, it only drops your defensive stats, so your attack power does not go down successively. This is going to be a really strong buff for Emboar. It also gets access to Double Edge, which is notable because it's boosted by its Reckless ability. So that could be an interesting option just for some high power normal type damage. It gets Knockoff, which is great for breaking through some of the Psychic and Ghost types that would otherwise resist your close combats. And there's high horsepower there. It does already get Earthquake, but in doubles, high horsepower is a nice single target option for some high power ground type damage. All in all, Emboar's looking pretty cool. It's one of my favorite starter Pokemon, so I'm looking forward to see how it functions in Scarlet and Violet. A mini buff that I wanted to mention is Tentacruel getting Flip Turn. This Pokemon is a relatively good utility Pokemon in singles, so you can spread some toxic spikes, rapid spin away the opponent's hazards, and then flip turn out of there. Not earth shattering, but definitely a useful thing for Tentacruel to have. A really interesting buff that I can't wait to use is Cinccino. Cinccino I think is significantly better this generation. Firstly, because it now gets access to the move Tidy Up, which boosts its attack and speed by one stage, so it's like a Dragon Dance, but for some normal types. This is really great for Cinccino. It's already really fast, so it means that you could potentially run an Adamant Nature boosting your attack instead of your speed, get one Tidy Up off, and then you'll be outspeeding everything anyway, and be hitting super hard. But what's really cool for Cinccino this generation is it gets access to the Loaded Dice item. That might seem like a weird choice for a Pokemon with access to Skill Link, but what it does is it frees up Cinccino's ability slot so that it can use Technician, which boosts the power of low base power moves by 50%, and that includes multi-hit moves like Tail Slap, Bullet Seed, because each hit is a low base power. So it gives you a 50% damage boost to these multi-hit moves, and with a Loaded Dice, you can ensure that they're hitting 4 to 5 times. So that's an extremely powerful move. So Cinccino can basically now have the equivalent of a choice-banded damage output, but without locking into any move. So I think Cinccino is looking crazy strong now. You can set up with Tidy Up and then go for those Loaded Dice, Technician-boosted Tail Slaps that are just going to do so much damage. Going from one very offensive Pokemon to a more defensive Pokemon, let's consider Bastiodon. This is a fossil Pokemon with basically no offenses and super high defenses. Previous generations it's been very, very passive and has suffered for that. But now it gets access to Body Press, which is damage based off your defense stat, which is sky high for Bastion. It's base 168, one of the highest defense stats in the game. This thing is going to hit so hard with Body Press, especially because it can boost it even further with Iron Defense. Not only that, it does also get access to Foul Play, which does damage based off the opponent's attack stat. So again, despite Bastiodon's low offensive stats, Foul Play and Body Press now give it a way to be a bit less passive. I think Bastiodon also massively benefits from Terastallization. Being a defensive Pokemon, it's really been held back by two quad weaknesses to fighting and ground type, which are both very common attacking types. So that means that it's not doing its job so well. It wants to tank hits, but it's got these glaring weaknesses. But with terrestrialization, it can turn into one other type, which has no quad weaknesses, and it can be a much better defensive type, which is huge for Bastiodon. So I think Bastiodon is in probably the best place it's ever been in this generation. Now let's move on to more of a weird one that's definitely more of a vibe for this channel. Malamar now gets Skill Swap, and that's cool because it has the contrary ability. Now we have had one Pokemon previously that has had the combination of the contrary ability and Skill Swap in Spinder, but Spinder is a bad Pokemon. It's got very low base stats and is KO'd very easily, and also it's not in this generation. So we now have a Skill Swap contrary Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet, which is a very fun combination. Just imagine skill swapping contrary onto an overheat Chi-Yu, for example. That's just one example. It's a really fun strategy. I feel like it will be pretty tricky to pull off, but it's definitely something I want to look into. I think that there are some really fun combos that you could try out here. So Malamar with skill swap. Now I'm going to move on to two electric types that were in great need of buffs because they were physical attackers, and physical electric types have suffered for a long time. But now there is a new move called Supercell Slam. It's a physical electric type attack with base 100 power, which is very strong, much stronger than anything we've really seen so far. Its only drawback is its 95% accuracy, which isn't great, but it's pretty accurate. But it does cause half of your health and recoil if you miss. And that's not all though. If you attack into a Protect, or if you attack into a ground type, you also take that recoil. So that's not ideal, but it does give these physical attackers a nice, powerful option, whereas they used to have to rely on Wild Charge, which is not a particularly great move. So here we're talking about Zebstrika. Really nice to see this Pokemon return. I love its design. I think it's one of the best looking Pokemon. It gets Supercell Slam, which is really nice. It also gets high horsepower for the first time, which can help it take on opposing electric types. And it does also get Trailblaze, which can be helpful for hitting the ground types that might want to switch in on that Supercell Slam. You can hit them for super effective damage and then get a speed boost at the same time. So all of that is really great for Zebstrika, and I'm hoping that it does well in this generation. That remains to be seen. In singles, where Protect is less common, I think that it will perform better because Supercell Slam will be more spammable. But then we have the big one, which is Electivire. Electivire got a lot of buffs, Supercell Slam being one of them. It's going to hit so hard with that move. It also got access to Knockoff, just a great physical move that removes items. It got access to Bulk Up as well. Really, really great for boosting its attack while also bolstering its defense a little bit. And then you've also got Trailblaze here as well, so you can hit those ground types while getting a speed boost, which is really, really nice and gives Electivire multiple setup options, which is very strong. I'm hoping that Electivire will perform really well this generation. It has been underwhelming for so long. It's also worth noting that Follow Me is now an egg move for this Pokemon. It used to be an event-only move, which was tricky to get. It's not a particularly bulky Pokemon, but with its Motor Drive ability, it could be an interesting way to redirect electric type attacks, and Follow Me redirection is always very strong, so it's a potential option there, although I don't think it'll see much use here. Also to note that Magmortar gets Follow Me as well. Magmortar might have a bit more success with that, but Magmortar didn't get many other moveset buffs, so I didn't really want to mention it too much here. And the last one that I want to call out before we move on to the busted Pokemon is Glimmora getting Meteor Beam, just because I mentioned it in a previous video about buffs. It does actually eventually get access to Meteor Beam. If you give Glimmora the Power Herb and this move, it will get a special attack boost and an extremely powerful Rock-type nuke on the same turn. So that can be really cool for Glimmora. I don't really think that there are many other Pokemon that will benefit so much from this move, and it does remain to be seen how strong Glimmora will be with it, because it tends to run more defensive items, in VGC at least, and without them it may not survive long enough to get the Meteor Beam off. But it's still an option, and it's maybe worth trying out. So now let's move on to the busted stuff, all the broken things that are getting even stronger. First one to call out, Incineroar. What a place to start. Our old friend Incineroar with Intimidate and Fake Out and Parting Shot and Snarl and all those good things is coming back. Plus, it now gets access to Helping Hand, which is one thing that Arcanine had over it. It no longer has over Incineroar. I think that a lot of the disruptive moves like Fake Out and Snarl and Parting Shot will all still remain as staples, things like Will-O-Wisp as well. But if you're running Incineroar on a more offensive team, you may appreciate the added damage output that it can give with Helping Hand. So that's something to bear in mind. The next one I want to talk about is a pseudo-legendary Metagross. Definitely a Pokemon that is sorely in need of buffs. This Pokemon now gets access to a new move called Hard Press. It's a steel type move that does more damage the higher the opposing Pokemon's HP stat. At the time of recording, I'm not exactly sure what its max power is. We do already have moves like this in Ring Out and Crush Grip that both have a max power of 150, which I think would be crazy if Hard Press is the same. I have a feeling it will be weaker than that because Ring Out and Crush Grip are both normal type moves, and a lot of the time normal type moves have a slightly higher base power than other moves because they can't be super effective and ghost types are immune, whereas for steel nothing is immune. It can be super effective against stuff, which would make it a crazy powerful move. So I have a feeling it's not going to be base 150 power, but it's still probably going to be a very powerful move and easily capable of one-hit KOing those Fluttermanes, which is the important thing. Metagross is also going to get access to Heavy Slam, which can be very powerful against light Pokemon. With Hard Press and Iron Head, it's got so many steel type options now. It does also get access to Knock Off, again a great physical move for removing those items and blasting past some ghost types and psychic types. And possibly the most significant one is Metagross now gets Psychic Fangs, which I think will 100% be its go-to psychic type attack. Previously we've had to rely on Zen Headbutt, and that 90% accuracy is a killer. Missing 10% of the time is not the one. Psychic Fangs is more powerful and always hits, and gets rid of Reflect and Light Screen too. And it does also get Trailblaze, can help blasting past some water types that resist your steel type moves, and gives you a speed boost at the same time. So as you can see, Metagross got a ton of new moves. I think it's definitely looking pretty good. Right, let's move on to some legendaries. Again, much needing of buffs. We have Latios. Latios now gets access to Flip Turn, which I think is a really good option for it if you want to run a choice item. If you want to scout what your opponent is going to switch into it to tank your moves, you can go for Flip Turn, deal a bit of chip damage, and retain the momentum so you can try to take out Latios's check so that it can sweep later in the game. So I think that's actually a really powerful option for a choiced Latios. But there is a balancing nerf. It no longer gets access to Defog in singles. That will limit its utility, so it probably will just focus more in on that offensive role. Let's talk about Regigigas. We saw Regigigas perform really well last generation. It got a nice buff in access to Protect, so that it could stall its own slow start turns, which was pretty cool. But mainly, it got access to a new boyfriend in Weezing. Weezing's neutralizing gas switched off its slow start so it could do tons of damage. One issue Regigigas has had is it doesn't have access to a ton of normal type moves, and last generation it relied on Giga Impact because you were always going to Dynamax it, so you could go for Max Strike, and then when your Dynamax wore off, you were left in this weird position where you have to go for Giga Impacts, which generally got a one-hit KO every time you went for one, but then you would be left recharging. Regigigas now gets access to Double Edge, so you will not be in that position. Double Edge is great for Regigigas. It has such a high HP pool, so that recoil won't be too much of a concern, and it does so much damage. So again, Regigigas and Boyfriend Weezing are looking very cute together. Love is love. Let's move on to the Musketeers. So Terrakion didn't really get any notable buffs, although it is still a strong option. But Cobalion and Virizion, which are maybe the two more overlooked of the Musketeers, got access to Aura Sphere and Vacuum Wave, which are really nice. They both got usable special attack stats. So having Aura Sphere and Vacuum Wave, so you don't have to rely on Focus Blast, is really nice. Some priority there as well. Very cool. Cobalion specifically also gets Body Press, which I think is really good. Cobalion has a really high defense stat, so it's going to do a lot of damage with that Body Press and can Iron Defense for even more damage. So I think that's actually a really big one for Cobalion. But then we also have Keldeo, which gets access to Vacuum Wave. Keldeo is an extremely strong special attacker, and now it gets a priority move, so Keldeo is looking very scary. And lastly, let's move on to some Paradox Pokemon. The main buff here is that Great Tusk, Iron Treads, Iron Hands, and Iron Thorns all get Supercell Slam. Great Tusk and Iron Treads particularly appreciate this for hitting water types and flying types that they would otherwise struggle to take down. Iron Hands and Iron Thorns love it just because physical electric type stab moves are really hard to come by, and they will be doing a ton of damage with this. And then just to note that Great Tusk now gets some fire coverage in Temper Flare. It's not a particularly strong move, but it will give it ways to hit certain Pokemon that it couldn't hit before. And then Iron Treads gets Hard Press, that steel type move that does more damage the higher the target's HP is, which could be a very strong move for Iron Treads. So in my opinion, those are some of the strongest buffs coming out of the Indigo Disk DLC. Stay tuned for more videos. I will be covering some of the new Pokemon very soon. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content. All that's left to be said is I've been Foo, you've been awesome, and hopefully see you next time. Goodbye.